Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsas.
Hey, welcome to the show. Leadership is Changing. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Leaders everywhere confront similar obstacles because people are people, but everywhere you go, leaders are overwhelmed, disrupted, and under pressure. They run from email to email, meeting to meeting. Many leaders are not changing quick enough, which means they run the risk of becoming irrelevant and being left behind. The purpose of the show is taking our listeners' leadership to another level by finding their balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. I believe we don't have enough effective leaders in the world today, and if we can get the leaders to step up and lead change, then they can inspire real change. Hey, listeners, it's now time to adapt in our fast-moving world, and I want to welcome you to today's episode. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. You know, we've had quite a good run here in the sense that this podcast has been going for about 10 months now, and we've had tremendous support from our listeners and people who I've interviewed from around the world, different leaders and so forth, and so it's been wonderful to do that. So today I'm going to actually bring to you a mashup, as we call it. It's a portion of different episodes that have happened in the past. Now, before I explain a little bit more about that, what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you haven't already checked out the episode 00, which is the reason why, it's the story that I share on the reason why I've started the podcast and the purpose of the podcast. It's the very, very, very first episode, even though it's 00. Go and check that out, and love to hear your thoughts about it. Hey, listeners, if you haven't already checked out the Facebook group or the LinkedIn page, which is two communities that we have on two different platforms around Leadership is Changing, we'd love to see you there, and feel free to join those different communities. Well, I've had some superb guests on the show, and what I'm going to do over the next few weeks is just bring to you some mashup, as we call it in the podcast industry, of these different parts of these different episodes of these different guests that I've actually interviewed. And today we've got 4 of them, and it's around mainly just to find out a little bit more about them, but also the main question is, who's their favorite leader and why? And that person could be alive or from history. So I've got Christopher Luxon, who's the ex-CEO of Air New Zealand. He was on episode 1. Chappell, who's podcast host of Build Your Network, a podcast that is ranked very well in the global sense around the globe. Dr. Vince Molinaro, so he is an author of 2 books. The books are The Leadership Contract and Accountable Leaders, and so he's on episode 4. Travis was episode 2. And Tracie Ybarra, she was, when we did the recording as Executive Solutions at Dell Technologies. She has since then left the organization and is now the global leader of talent and learning at Vontier. And so she's there, and I think she was on episode 5. So wonderful to be able to share their side of things as well with you again. So just sit back, relax, take notes, and enjoy the episode. So, Christopher, if I was to ask you, who is your favorite leader? Now, that person could be alive or it could be a person from history. Who is your favorite leader and why?
Well, there's been a lot of leaders that I've admired over the years, and I've taken pieces from them, really. There's no singular leader, but, people like Winston Churchill, I was always uber impressed with. As a young boy, I read all of the biographies of Churchill. Just the vision to be able to stand on his principles, often in the face, if you think about before World War II, before people had actually had sort of acknowledged the threat of Nazi Germany, and he saw it early, and he actually was talking about it very, very early. And then the way he inspired people towards that vision was really impressive. Certainly, people like Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State for the US, just the intelligence, the keenness, the energy, the enthusiasm, for her to keep doing what she's been doing, and the wisdom that she now brings to a lot of conversations around the world is really impressive. And I was always impressed by President Obama, because I thought, irrespective of whether you like his politics or not, the way that he carried himself with good grace and good dignity, and the way that his administration had no major scandal, and was admirable. It was really impressive for those of us watching that.
Yeah, and I know that the likes of the John Maxwell's and that, they talk about everyone can communicate, few can connect, and I think the Obamas of the world is where they could connect with their audience.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big tasks of a leader, is that communicator connector role. And that's the difference between a manager who can activate and often run strategy, but actually to do the communication connection thing is really a very special gift, and something that can be built and developed, I think, over time too.
Who is your favorite leader? In other words, somebody could be alive today, could be from history, but who is your favorite leader and why?
That's a good question, man. I've given this a little bit of thought before, and somebody that I look to that is not alive anymore that I think was just a tremendous leader was Winston Churchill. I think that he was an amazing leader. I think that Marcus Aurelius was an amazing leader, and reading more and understanding about his life and the things that he was dealing with all the time, I think that he was an amazing leader. And, I think that there's a lot of examples of really good leaders today as well, but those are two of the ones that really stick out in my mind of the people that I've, spent a little bit of time studying and people that I admire that are in history.
What did you learn from Winston Churchill? Why him?
The resolve in the midst of chaos is something that I just truly admire in somebody else. And that is something that he very much embodied in the time frame that he was living in, and the struggles that he was, that he had to lead his people through during that time period. I think is just extremely admirable that he was able to keep a level head and rest on his ability to lead and not freak out and make really poor decisions. And I just think that he handled it with extreme, poise and level headedness that I don't think is very common, it seems, anymore, to be able to de-dramatize a situation almost, where he literally the world is in disarray and we're in the middle of world wars, and he's just seems to be as calm as ever. You know what I mean? I just really respect that resolve and that ability to lead people through times like that without making the mass hysteria worse than it really is.
Hey, Vince, who is your favorite leader? Now, that leader could be somebody who's alive today, or could be someone from history, and why are they your favorite leader?
It's such a tough question to answer because there's so many people to admire. I don't know if I could pick just one, but if I were to pick one, it wouldn't come from history or whatnot. I mean, there's different leaders who I admired for different things, but my colleague Zinta had a huge imprint on me early in my career. The person who I referenced, she was a senior manager. She was always someone who would lift her people up, and she would always be in the background. And she was so deliberate in how she led. If you ever went into her office to meet her, she would immediately stop what she were doing, turn around, look at you eye to eye, put her hands on her lap, and basically communicate, I am here and listening to you 100%. She wasn't distracted by anything else. It was something that I just, what I realized is I just observe those things in a very subtle way. And I think that's what sometimes we don't appreciate as leaders. And it's hard to do when you're, dealing with multiple demands and you've got a lot of pressure on you to be as deliberate as she was. And so in a lot of my writing and a lot of my work, I really do focus on the need for us to be really clear about the kind of leader we need to be and want to be, and be very deliberate in achieving that. So for her, because of her personal impact, I would pick her.
Great, yeah. And I'm sure that a lot of us do shape ourselves as leaders, as you say in your book too, about how we see and watch other leaders and we experience them, whether it be a positive or a negative thing, but then that actually does help shape us to be the leader we want to be. And we also see the leaders that we don't want to be like. And I think you're giving a great example there of her. And I know you talk about her in your book as well, which is really important.
Yeah. And if you just think about when we see a leader just, behave in a way that, to a high standard of behavior. And if you look at who is probably right now on the planet, the person seen as being the best leader is your prime minister, right? And if you think about, after the tragic events in Christchurch and how she stepped up and how that leadership reverberated around the world, right? That to me is what is fascinating, right? People in parts of the world who may not even known about New Zealand or know about Prime Minister Ardern just see her and go, wow, there's something there that I connect to. That's the power. And I think a lot of leaders don't really appreciate that they have that power, not in a formal sense, but in an informal sense.
Yeah. And I think that word you just used, which is connect, is really quite important for a lot of leaders. Hey, Tracie, if I was to ask you a question, which is, who is your favorite leader? And that person could be alive or it could be from history. So who is your favorite leader and why?
Wow. I kind of struggle with those favorite questions because there's a little bit of something that I really appreciate or admire in so many people. And so just to kind of go, it's this person, is challenging to me. But I'll try to be good to you, Denis, and give you something here. I think as I'm looking at that circle of people that I admire, and it is a circle, and I'm pulling from that circle accordingly, I think I look at a leader, and to admire them, I have to trust them. That's probably the first and foremost important thing to me. There's nothing to me more rewarding than trusting relationships. And then as I've become more experienced, I'm really turned off by ego. I'll be honest with you. I love a confident leader, but I want high confidence and low ego because I think this creates a better partnering environment for me as an employee under another leader, and I need to be happy in my work, so that's incredibly important. I also tend to admire leaders who are not afraid, open to try new things and grow and willing to change their mind. And then I think, probably last, and I'm sure there are other things, but a passion for people, not, surely at work, but honestly in the world. I want to see the leader who is more than just a title or a job. And I've become much more interested in looking at companies and their leaders to get a sense of how do they give back to others. So that kind of gives you a feeling. But if I had to kind of give you names, because you asked, I would say Michael Dell, and I'm not kidding because I work there. It was a conscious decision to come to Dell based on all this. I'm at a point in my career where, I can be a little bit picky. And I think more and more people are being picky. I don't think you have to be where you are in your career. I think more and more people feel like they have the right to be picky. And I wanted a culture of an organization and people that I felt had value systems and that mattered to me. And this company did it for me. They walk the talk in their culture code and their leadership principles and their people philosophy. And so the environment here is awesome. So I really do appreciate what Michael has done for the company, but others just outside. Richard Branson, I think he's cool, entrepreneurial, very philanthropic. He's a little bit quirky, but I like that. Oprah, because she digs in on tough subjects, but she seems well balanced. Brene Brown, because she's positive and real. Jeff Bezos, because I think he's interesting. He's just interesting. And I happen to get a lot of Amazon products here. And then Maya Angelou, to me, she's wise. She's very wise, and I admire her and grounded. So, that's a little bit, none of them are perfect. None of us are. I'm sure there's good and bad in all those leaders, but there's a piece of them that I find positive, something that I can pull on as I think about how I want to think or show up in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So you can take bits from everybody, but to help form you as a leader, to see how you show up in the world of leadership, which is pretty cool. Hey, listeners, I really hope you've really enjoyed those different snippets or the mashup from those different episodes with superb guests that I've had on the podcast, Leadership is Changing, over the last 10 months. If you haven't already checked out the episode 00, go ahead and do that. That's my story, really. It's just a very small episode, very short in time frames, and it's really just giving you a bit of an idea on why I started the actual podcast, Leadership is Changing. We have a Facebook group, and we also have a LinkedIn page set up for the podcast Leadership is Changing. And it's a forum for you to join and share a lot with other like-minded people around about leadership is changing and other topics. So feel free to come along and join us there. We'd love to see you as part of those communities. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Change is incredibly scary, especially with the unknown and unfamiliar territory. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing. Hey, look out for the episodes as they've been released and download them, have a listen, put a review and a rating. Those reviews and ratings really help the podcast, so I'd love you to do that. That'd be really great. Hey, if you've got any feedback for me on the show, or if there's a question you want me to ask my guests as I interview them, or if you have a question for the freestyle episode of Ask Denis, feel free to send me an email, denis@leadingchangepartners.com. Hey, listeners, thanks for tuning in. As always, great to have you here. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.